Good afternoon, and thank you for coming today, Saturday, 2 o'clock. I think Bob would be proud of how many he got people to church. That's not bad, right? He loved this place. And Bob had a bigger heart than I think a lot of us knew. Sometimes Bob came across as a little bit aloof and sometimes strong-willed, should we say? And sometimes that sort of created a standoffishness for people with Bob. But Bob had a really big heart, filled with love for God, for this world, for this church, and especially for his family. And so I know that he's grateful that you're here. And for those who are joining us online from wherever you are, whenever you're able to watch, we're grateful that you've tuned in to celebrate his life. We come here in a place that Bob helped build, literally, not just figuratively, to celebrate his life and to give God thanks for him. It is really hard for me to talk about Bob without also talking about Francis. They were a wonderful team. And we'll talk more about that, but I come today to celebrate Bob, but also to celebrate Bob and Francis for all that they were, all that they are. And I'm grateful to have been their pastor over these years. They taught me a lot about what it means to be a Christian and to be a pastor. And for that, I'm grateful. So we're going to do the kinds of things that Bob would do. We're going to stand and we're going to sing How Great Thou Art. Now, okay, before you do that, let you know that Bob never sang. Bob would stand for the hymns and he would look at the hymn book, but he wouldn't sing. I think I know why. I'll tell you why later. But I invite you to go ahead and sing. It's a more familiar tune to a lot of us. It's How Great Thou Art. The verses are not only in your bulletin, they'll be projected on the screen. And I invite you to rise as you're able and sing this great hymn of faith. You may be seated. Please join me in prayer. It is you, God, who created everything that is, the stars and planets, the comets, the solar systems and universes beyond what we could see or even think might be there. It's you who pushed up the mountains and pressed down the valleys, who filled the seas and oceans with water, who created the trees, the grass, the saguaro cactus. Thank you. You are amazing. Of all the things that we have thought to create and build, we could never have thought of those. And yet you filled us with your creative spirit so we could do some pretty interesting things. And today we come to thank you for filling Bob with your spirit and your creativity and your sense of order that he helped to create here for us, not just in Tucson, but throughout the world. As he joined together with his family in Sundt construction, we know, God, that you worked through him to create communities, businesses, where people could gather, churches where people could wonder, jobs where people could earn livings and support their own families. Thank you. Thank you for everything that you poured into him, that he poured out, that we benefit from even now. So as we come today, God, we glorify you as we thank you for Bob. May all our words about him not only honor him, but honor you. In Jesus' name, amen. I will bet you that there are a lot of you who have a lot of stories about Bob Sundt. Some of them should not be told here. Some of them can be told in Fellowship Hall for a time of fellowship after worship or wherever you might toast to Bob later. And I know that a lot of you would like to share those stories, but we worked together with Taya to choose a couple of us to kind of share Bob's life. And so one of his workers, co-workers, colleagues, Doug Pruitt, is here to get us started off. Doug, would you come and share your memories?
Thank you very much, Steve. And it's really an honor for me to be asked by the family to speak. It's really interesting. I wasn't nervous, and I felt pretty steady, and now I've got a lump in my throat. Many of you obviously knew Bob personally because of your relationship with him in this church, which he did love so well, or through all the different community organizations that he was involved in, which was many. But I want to share with you a story about not the man in this church or the community organizations, but the man that some of us work for, and how fortunate we were to have the opportunity to do that. Basically because he was really an amazing leader, and he was an incredible mentor to us. He had instrumental in developing a career path for many young people, such as Corky Collins, who's here today, and myself. And we are grateful for that because it helped us, one, become a much better employee trying to support this company, Sundt Construction. But it also helped us become better leaders later in our life at Sundt, and then also at some point in time, better community leaders in our respective communities. I worked for an engineering company at Fort Huachuca, and Sundt was the contractor that was selected. And after working with them for several months, they offered me a job. I talked to my dad and said, "What do you think about that?" And his response is, if you know people who know the owners of that company, go talk to them and ask them How do they feel about the owners relative to their ethics and their values? So I did, and basically everyone I spoke to said that they were the best. They were a very ethical company. They knew how to get things built. They paid their bills on time. And if there was any kind of dispute or issue, they sat down to get it resolved. So my dad's advice was, if that's how they feel about the company, I'd accept the job. And if you do your part and work hard, you might end up having a long career. What I didn't realize at 21, that it would be a 45-year career. When Becky and I got married, I was working at the Asarco smelter in Winkleman. And we moved from my place and her place to our place, and we started setting up housekeeping. And then I was scheduled to continue there until that project wind down, and then I was going to be transferred back to Tucson in their estimating department. And on a Friday, Bob Sundt called and said, "We're not going to move you back to Tucson. You need to be on a project in Phoenix Monday morning when it starts." Now, at that time, my wife was pregnant, and I took off to Phoenix. So she had to find a place in Phoenix for us to live, and then she had to work with the movers to get us moved from our place to our place, but in Phoenix. So wasn't too much later, Becky gave birth to a little girl, and shortly after that, Bob came by, knocked on our apartment door, and he had a gift. And the gift was a pink sweater for our daughter. And then he apologized. He apologized for moving us around so much in the initial part of our marriage. And he said to basically, I think to make him feel better, for all the hassle that Sundt had given us, which we didn't look at as hassle, it's just part of the business. But he paid our rent for 6 months. For me, that defined who Bob Sundt was. And you touched on that a little bit, Steve. He was a very caring and a very generous person. And I was fortunate enough, because I worked for him, to see that throughout his career at Sundt. Corky Collins and I, who are great friends, we talked a lot since Bob passed away. And basically, to some extent, just to reminisce about the guy that we were so fortunate enough to work for. Bob was a visionary and incredibly creative. He was respected nationally in the National Contractors Association for that creativity and innovation, because a lot of things that Sundt was doing at that time was out in front of the industry. The list of creativity and his innovation is far too long, but there are some things I want to touch on. Basically because he was the driver behind 4 different things, he and his brother on one of them, that really changed the complexity of who Sundt was as a company at that point in time to where they ended up after these changes were made. One is Saudi Arabia. Because Bob was actively involved with a major architectural firm, they asked Bob if he wanted to go to Saudi Arabia to build for Aramco Oil Company. And Bob was very interested. But as he did, which he always did, tremendous amount of research on everything, he realized if we were going to take that risk and go to Saudi Arabia, we had to be totally self-sufficient as a company. We were going to be working in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, which is essentially a desert. No Costco's, no Home Depots, no lumber yards, no concrete plants, no block plants, and no workforce. So we didn't just become the contractor that had to go there. We had to be more than a contractor. We had to be a major material supplier, getting material from all over the world into Saudi Arabia to build the project. We had to be a fabricator to fabricate everything to get it built. And then we had to go find a workforce from somewhere around the country, which we ended up settling on the Philippines, and move what ended up being about 2,500 craft workers to Saudi Arabia and provide their housing and their food. So tremendous, tremendous effort on Bob's part and Sundt's part, but he was the driver behind that. When we went into that country and started the construction, Bob spent in the first year over 100 days in Saudi himself. Not all at once, but on multiple trips, working with our project team, making sure that we did what we said we could do, and then working with the Aramco Oil Company, making sure, one, they were happy. At the end of that first year, Sundt had completed 156 housing units. The next contractor completed 3. The other 2 hadn't completed a house. So it was through his personal just drive, his creativity and his vision, that Aramco all of a sudden started giving Arabian Sundt a lot of work, all different types of work. And we actually became their maintenance contractor in that eastern province. Well, Sundt had a great run for 11 years in Saudi, and it financially was incredibly successful. And if you were inside of Sundt and knew where we were financially when all that started, that was significantly important for Sundt at that time. But what it did was changed how we began to think about ourselves as a company and our ability to accomplish something that was far different than what Sundt had been doing. So it changed the direction and the psyche of where Sundt wanted to go as an organization. I think the second thing that was important is Bob was passionate too, by the way. He felt that we needed to have a major presence in the Phoenix area. We were a Tucson contractor, and I don't know for that love-hate between Tucson and Phoenix, U of A and ASU, but he said we need to be in Phoenix. The board did not want to go there. But he was rather persistent, coming back to him, talking about it. So finally the board acquiesced and said, okay, go do it. If it doesn't work, come home. So Bob put together a great team, spent a lot of his personal time in Phoenix to try and make this work and work out right. And Sundt immediately started picking up work. Very nice projects, large projects, and was very profitable in Phoenix. So his vision turned out to be a tremendous decision because, again, it changed the complexity of who Sundt was and where we were headed at that time. A tremendous vision. Becoming non-union. Sundt had been a union contractor for a number of years. We had no problems with the unions, except all of a sudden we couldn't negotiate a deal with the unions. And Bob's response to that is that maybe we just need to go non-union. So that created an interesting dialogue in Sundt at the board because it was like, well, if we don't have to pay those high wages and benefits, we can be more competitive. So there was a discussion around that, and then finally Bob just spoke up and said, look, that's not who we are. If we do this, we are not going to do it on the backs of our craft workers. If we go non-union, we're going to pay union wages, we're going to have excellent benefits, and we're going to have an excellent retirement program for our craft workers, because those are the people who do the work. So we moved in that direction. And the craft workers eventually became a part of the ESOP. And today we do have several craft workers who have over $1 million in their ESOP account. So again, a very generous person, thinking about others. And that's just reflects of who he was all the time. Now, it offered a purchase, and I think this is probably more of a philosophical, and it's very important, I think, for who we are today. But we were offered by a large international contractor to purchase Sundt at a very good price. And then there was a discussion at the board, will that be a good deal? Because then we could take that capital and we could buy equipment and we can do this, we could expand and grow, and et cetera. So after quite a discussion, Bob and Wilson both said, okay, we've listened to this, we're not selling this company. We are here today because of the generosity of Marion Sundt. John Sundt died unexpectedly, and we weren't a very large company at that point in time. And he had done well, but he had, like most people, take profits out of the company because he was the sole proprietor and use it to buy other things that he owned, and it was very successful. But Sundt wasn't that strong. Well, what she did was basically she knew that, and she gifted almost all of her stock to the leadership group so this company could survive. Again, because of the generosity of another Sundt. So they remembered that. They understood that. And they said, we're not selling. And what we want this company to continue to be owned by the employees. So it stays an employee-owned company. And we want the company to grow and to prosper and to expand. But most of all, we want Sundt to remain that employee-owned company, which, by the way, it still is today. One of the things that I really respected Bob for is he made it clear to those of us who work for him that there's a lot more to business than earning a profit. Yeah, you got to make a profit, you got to stay in business, but you have a responsibility as a business to give back to the community that you work in, or communities if you work in many. And you have a responsibility to give back to the industry locally and nationally to make it a better industry. And equally as important, you've got to do things to help those who are far less fortunate. Now, one of the easiest ways to do that as a contractor is build things. So we would respond if a charity requested and send maybe 2 or 3 carpenters to a small charity to do a little, maybe build some shelves or some cabinet work or whatever. But we also realized we could build projects. They're not large. Sometimes they were just dishing to a charity, or they were a small new charity facility. And we would work with our suppliers and ask them, if subcontractors, if they would consider discounting their bids and get their suppliers to discount the bids because it's a charity. And then when we were finished, we'd settle up with the billings, and we would never bill them for our overhead and profit. And if you take a $2 million charity, that's probably saving them $350,000 to $400,000. And we did, I think, 10 of those between Phoenix, Tucson, San Diego, Sacramento. So that is who he was relative to helping others. Bob, and you said he was an amazing individual, and I look back on my career, and I'm so grateful that I had him as my mentor. I learned a lot, and he gave me a lot of opportunities to fail rather than not allowing us to do things where you could fail. And I think if he could see this company today, he would be so proud, because 32 years after he retired, under the leadership of Mike Hoover, who's here today, our CEO, those values at Sundt that Bob believed in are still held so dear. And they're such an integral part of the fabric of who Sundt is today. And I know he would just be so elated in terms of what we still are, employee-owned, and we're still doing good things in the community, and we're still taking care of our craft workers. So Bob was a great leader, and I think just a wonderful human being. He will be missed, I'm sure, by a lot of people here, but he's going to be missed by those of us like Corky and myself who grew up under Bob's tutelage. We were very fortunate. He's a tremendous human being, and I know we will miss him as well. Thank you very much.
To bring it a little more personal, his son-in-law, Mason.
Let's see, I'm Mason Myers. I was Bob's son-in-law. I want to talk about Bob's early life and some of his favorite stories thereabout. Others have already talked about him in the business world and what a wonderful thing he was there. And then I want to close something that Bob has actually requested in advance was 2 stanzas from a poem by Robert W. Service titled Carry On, and I believe it's in the program that was passed out. Due to family troubles, Bob's elementary schooling was split between Winona, New Jersey, and Tucson. A sudden family shift to Tucson when he was going to start the 4th grade had him only having white knickers to wear to school. As a result of that, his first day at school, he suffered some bullying and got into some working with some of the other students. And as a result of that, an after-school fight in the schoolyard ensued. The fight was broken up by the teachers that saw what was going on, but the boys just went across the street and resumed their fight. When Bob got home, his mother was aghast, and she brought out the "wait till your father gets home and see this" line, okay? When Bob's father saw Bob and heard what had happened, he asked Bob what the other boy looked like. Bob replied, "Looks just like me." That settled the matter, and Bob's parents then went right out and bought Bob denim pants to wear to school. Later, when Bob was in high school back in Winona, one day he played hooky and went into New York to a concert. The next day, when the authorities at the school wanted to know why he had missed school, he told them they'd gone to see Frank Sinatra at the Paramount Theater. Apparently, among the administrators, there were some Sinatra fans because Bob only got a scolding and no punishments. If you accept 2 of his favorite stories, Bob was a believer in reincarnation. Once, when the family was traveling in Rome and Bob went into the Colosseum, he was overcome by the feeling that he had been there before. When he told this story, I used to kid him about the fact that maybe he had been there before, but he had been one of the lions in the arena. Another time, when Bob was attending a construction convention in Montana, he met a man, and both of them immediately thought that they knew each other, even though after several drinks and much discussion, they could never figure out where their paths had crossed before. Bob started work on a full-time basis at Sundt Construction in May of 1950 and retired from the organization in June of 1992. His work was drew him to projects in areas like Nogales, Fort Huachuca, Ganado on the Navajo Reservation, and Flagstaff in Arizona, and Santa Maria in California. Bob then became president and managing director of the Arabian Sundt Limited from 1975 through 1986 on work performed in Saudi Arabia. Apparently, looking at that history, it seems as though the Sundt powers that be wanted to keep Bob out of the office. Well, to close, Bob requested that the following excerpt from Carry On by Robert W. Service be read. It's easy to fight when everything's right and you're mad with the thrill and the glory. It's easy to cheer when victory's near and wallow in fields that are gory. It's a different song when everything's wrong and when you're feeling infernally mortal. When it's 10 against 1 and hope there is none, buck up, little soldier, and chortle. There are some who drift out in the deserts of doubt, and some who in broodiness wallow. Where'd it go? Pardon me. There are others I know who in piety go because of a heaven to follow. But to labor with zest and give of your best for the sweetness and joy of the giving, to help other folks along with a hand and a song, why there's the real sunshine of the living. Carry on, fight the good fight and true. Believe in your mission, greet life with a cheer, There's big work to do, and that's why you are here. Carry on, carry on. Let the world be better for you. And at last, when you die, let this... Pardon. Let this be your cry. Carry on, my soul, carry on. Thank you.
Nicely done, gentlemen. This pulpit's open to you anytime. Francis signed in as member number 29. Bob signed in as member number 30. May 13th of 1956, they were two of our 75 charter members who got this place started. They began at Alice Vale Junior High until they had bought the property here at 6565 East Broadway. And they began building in 1957, and the first service was held Christmas Eve that year. By October of 1958, the South and West education wings had been built. In March of 1970, a new sanctuary was constructed. In 1996, a new building with a gym, bathrooms that had showers, and modern classrooms were built. And you can bet that Bob and Sundt Construction were here all along the way. In the very first construction, Bob had dirt brought in from another project here in Tucson because he realized there was a slope from off of Broadway down into what would become the parking lot. And he was concerned about all the building structures that were up here on this level. So he stole dirt from another construction site to help ensure that his church campus was built properly. He kept a good eye on all the projects. Bob served here as an elder in charge of many different things several times over his years of ministry here. I have read through his 2-volume set of his life history that he titled Reflections of a Construction Foot Soldier. It's fascinating and it's personal. I am not surprised, but I am humbled by how good Bob was at business, but also how all business was personal for Bob. He treated people as people, not as commodities for the next opportunity for Sundt Construction. He learned about world politics, religion, and relationships amongst people that could have easily made him a good politician, a fair and honest one. Wouldn't that be nice these days? Now, in reading through his stories of his life, I can tell you I'm grateful that he did not follow his mom's dreams for her boys to become doctors. But he built foundations that I now stand upon and within. A place for the soul to heal. Something far more eternal than trying to heal the body. He and Francis were really quite the team. To be honest, I think it was clearly the help of Francis that one of the most humbling things to Bob became his ability to meet with Saudi princes and with homeless folks and treat them all with the dignity each person deserves. Bob wasn't just a builder, at least at CPC anyway. He was a thinker, a planner, a doer. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty to fix something or to dabble in peanut butter from the local food bank so that sandwiches could be made for people in need here in Tucson. He laughed, he worshiped, and as I told you before, he never sang. He would stand next to Francis, right over where you all are, because Francis would sing in the choir, and Francis had a beautiful voice. And the choir would sing, and often Francis would then move over to stand next to Bob. And I don't know if Bob didn't sing because he couldn't, or if because he chose rather to listen to the voice of his beautiful wife, Francis. Oh, how Bob loved Francis. It was clear the admiration he had for her, and she for him. Bob would say something, shall I say, bold. And Francis would coyly respond, "Oh, Bob." And I miss then seeing them smile at each other. They loved their family. Bringing into their midst Taya and Eric, that was a great joy for them. Bob's faith was deep. He wasn't one to talk about it much until it really needed to be said. And when he did, I could tell. Bob knew the Lord. He believed deeply in God through Christ. In Matthew chapter 6, in the opening verses of that chapter, which is in the midst of what's known as the Sermon on the Mount that begins with blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. Jesus is speaking to his disciples and followers, and they're all trying to figure out, what do you do with this faith? And Jesus looks at them and he says, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before others in order to be seen by them, for then you have no reward from your Father in heaven. So whenever you give alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may be praised by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be done in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you." We heard how you received 6 months of rent, but I'll bet you there's a whole bunch of others who received at Bob's hand. And not just money from Sundt Construction, money out of Bob and Francis's pockets personally, because he reached out to people in need. And I'll bet you we'll never hear those stories, but I know they're there. Because hearing about them wasn't important to Bob. Living them was. That's how you do it. That's how you live life. Strongly, boldly, faithfully, kindly. That's Bob Sundt. And he showed us how life can be lived. Today, we say thank you for Bob Sundt. Let's pray. Great and holy God, of all the parts of life that you have made, we take time today to thank you for making Bob just as he was, for all the quirky personality pieces that he had, for the thick-rimmed glasses that he seemed to love, for the jokes he would snicker about, for the serious way he took life. We thank you. For the things that we might have said that we wish we didn't, for the things we didn't say that we now wish we had, we give them all to you, knowing that Bob loved us anyway. Thank you for teaching us so much through him. Thank you for being so brilliant as to create him just as he was. And so today, God, as we honor him, we reluctantly give him back to you. But we know his memory carries on in us. We know his legacy is across this planet. And though people may not know about it, we know Bob made a positive difference in life for a lot of people and a lot of generations yet to come. What a gift that is. Today, as Christians in his tradition, we thank you for the gift of us that you gave us in Jesus. We know there is something after this. As you raised Jesus from the dead when we turned against you, you didn't turn against us. And so we know your grace has poured over Bob, and he's with you forever. And the reunion with Francis must have been amazing. So today, God, we thank you for Bob Sundt. And in the music of the prayer that Jesus gave us, we unite our lives. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Carry on, carry on. Let the world be better for you. And at last, when you die, let this be your cry. Carry on, my soul. Carry on. I invite you to rise, to sing a favorite song, Let There Be Peace on Earth.
Peace that was meant
Bob was a good man. And I hope you today take a moment to just say, God, thank you for Bob and allowing us to be a part of his life and to see God in him and to learn from Bob about God. May you know the peace that he knew in his life. And folks, if you're going to do anything to honor Bob today or any day yet to come, take what was good in him and make it better in yourself. Imagine how the world could be. We know how it is already because of him, and how it could be even better through us. After the family has left the sanctuary, you're invited to come across to our fellowship hall. Lots of food in Bob's honor, because he also enjoyed eating and fellowshipping here at the church. And we invite you to come and be with us. Grace and peace to us all. Thank you for being here. Amen.